The bullet didn't make a sound she expected. She always thought if something like this ever happened, she would hear it. A crack, a bang, something sharp and final that would tell her brain what her body already knew. But no, there was just a white heat, a force, and then the floor was coming up to meet her face and the tray was falling, and somewhere above her, a man was screaming in Italian, and the only thought in Liliana Vasquez's mind as she lay bleeding on the floor of a restaurant she had worked in for 7 years was this: she didn't even know his name an hour ago. She still wasn't sure she knew who he really was. She was about to find out. If this story reaches inside your chest and squeezes, subscribe to this channel and follow Liliana's journey all the way to the end. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The night started the way most bad nights do, completely ordinary. Thursday, 8:53 p.m. Rosario's fine dining, Midtown Manhattan. Liliana Vasquez had been on her feet for 5 hours. Her shoulder, her good shoulder, the one that hadn't been strained last winter, was starting to send messages she was choosing to ignore. Her section had 9 tables. 7 were occupied. The kitchen was behind on 3 orders, and Paulo, the head chef, was dealing with it the way Paulo dealt with everything, by making everyone around him feel personally responsible for the fall of civilization. This was a normal Thursday. She didn't know yet that normal had already left the building. Vasquez. Marco, the floor manager, appeared at her elbow. Marco was a compact, efficient man who communicated primarily through eyebrow movements in the angle of his chin. Right now, his chin was doing something she hadn't seen before. "Table 9 wants to know about the lamb special," she said, not breaking stride. "Forget table 9. He stepped in front of her. Actually stepped in front of her, which Marco almost never did. "Corner booth, back left. I need you on it personally." She stopped. "I have 6 tables open right now. I'll cover them." She looked at him. Marco hadn't personally covered a table since 2019, when a senator had come in unannounced and the regular floor staff had collectively frozen. "Who is it?" "A guest." "Marco. An important guest." He paused. He said the next word like it cost him something. "Please." She looked across the restaurant toward the corner booth. A man was sitting there. That was all she could tell from this distance. A man, dark suit, sitting with a stillness that felt unnatural in a room full of people who were all busy being alive. He wasn't looking at his menu. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was simply sitting, both hands on the table, watching the room, or watching her. She wasn't sure which. "Fine," she said. "Water, full attention. Whatever he asks for, you get it immediately. And if he asks for something we don't have," Marco looked at her, "we have it." She picked up a fresh water glass and walked toward the corner. The closer she got, the more the feeling grew. Not fear exactly, something more like the feeling you get walking toward a sleeping dog you're not sure about, a low-frequency awareness that the normal rules might not apply here. He was younger than she'd expected from the suit, mid-30s maybe, dark hair with no gray in it, yet pushed back from a face that was all hard angles and careful control. A jaw that looked like it had been designed to communicate disagreement. Eyes that were, she registered this before she could stop herself, extraordinarily dark and already on her before she reached the table. He had been watching her. Not the room. Her. "Good evening." She set down the water. "My name is Liliana. I'll be taking care of you tonight." He didn't respond to that. He looked at her the way someone looks at a sentence they're still deciding the meaning of. "What's good here?" he asked. His accent was Italian. Not thick, the accent of someone who had learned to live in 2 languages, but never fully belonged to either. Honestly, something shifted slightly in his expression. Just slightly. "Please." "The lamb," she said. "Paulo's been making it the same way for 11 years. It's never wrong. The pasta is fresh, which matters. Avoid dessert tonight. The good pastry chef called in sick." He considered this. "The lamb, then." "The lamb," she confirmed. She turned to go. "What did you say your name was?" She turned back. "Liliana." He repeated it quietly as if testing the weight of it. "That's unusual." "My mother was an unusual woman." The corner of his mouth moved. Not enough to be called a smile, but enough. "I'm Alessio, he said. "I'll have that order in for you right away," she said, and walked back to the service station before she could say anything else because something about his eyes made her feel like continuing that conversation was the kind of thing you couldn't undo. Danny was waiting for her at the station. Danny was 22, still in the phase of the job where she found the difficult customers interesting rather than exhausting, but she wasn't looking interested right now. She was looking pale. "Did he tell you his name?" Donnie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said his name was Alessio." "Alessio Marchetti." Leliana paused in writing the order. "He didn't give me a last name." "Look at him." Danny tilted her head toward the corner booth without actually looking in that direction, the way you point at something you don't want to acknowledge. "Look at the way Marco is standing. Look at the way the hostess is standing. Look at every single person in this building who knows who Alessio Marchetti is." Leliana looked. Marco was standing near the bar facing the dining room, completely still. Not working, not managing, just standing positioned where he could see the corner booth at all times. The hostess, Greta, who had worked the door for 12 years and had the personality of someone who found everything mildly irritating, was standing at her podium with both hands flat on the surface and an expression on her face that Leliana had never seen before. She looked like she was trying not to exist. "Who is Alessio Marchetti?" Leliana asked. Danny looked at her. "My cousin works at a restaurant in the meatpacking district. She said he came in just once, and sat at a table for 2 hours. During those 2 hours, nobody spoke above a certain volume. Nobody laughed loudly. The bartender dropped a glass and literally apologized to the room." She paused. "The next day she found out who he was." "Which is," Danny's voice went very quiet. "You know the Marchetti name, the family." "Marchetti," Leliana said slowly. And something stirred at the back of her memory. Something from newspapers, from overheard conversations, from the specific way people in this city said certain names in certain contexts. The Marchetti family. "The family," Danny confirmed. The espresso machine hissed. Somewhere across the room, a couple laughed at something. The jazz standard playing overhead reached a gentle, completely inappropriate high note. Leliana looked at the corner booth. Alessio Marchetti was watching her again. She picked up his water glass to refill it and walked back to his table because that was her job, and she had never once let what a job required scare her off from doing it. He was on the phone when she returned. Italian, low and fast, the tone of someone conducting business that had no patience for interruptions. She reached to refill his water quietly. He held up one finger. "Wait." She waited. He finished the call, put the phone face down on the table with a deliberateness that meant it was staying there. Looked up at her. "Sit down," he said. "I'm sorry." For a moment, sit. Every professional instinct she had said no. She sat because something in his voice left very little room for the other option. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. 7 years. "You like it?" She thought about this honestly. "I like that I'm good at it." He almost smiled again. "That's not the same thing." "No," she agreed. "It's not." He studied her with that same evaluating quality, the way you look at something you're trying to categorize and keep finding it doesn't fit the categories you have. "You're not afraid of me," he said. It wasn't a question, but she answered it anyway. "You're a guest in a restaurant at 9 p.m. on a Thursday. What's there to be afraid of?" "You know my last name," he said. "I can tell by the way you're sitting." She met his eyes. "I learned it 5 minutes ago. And I don't know enough about you yet to decide how to feel," she said. A pause. Then from Alessio Marchetti, something she genuinely didn't expect, a real smile. Small, brief, gone before it could be fully observed, but real. "That," he said, "is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in a very long time." She stood. "I'll check on your lamb." Walking back to the kitchen, she became aware of something she didn't want to be aware of. Her hands were perfectly steady. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't afraid. She was interested, and that she told herself firmly was a problem. The next 40 minutes passed in the specific way that time passes when you're waiting for something to happen without knowing what it is. She brought him the lamb. He ate it the way he did everything else, deliberately, completely, without distraction. She refilled his wine. He thanked her with a nod that somehow felt more genuine than most people's full sentences. Table 6 needed attention. Table 9 was celebrating an anniversary and needed the candle relit. The bar was 3 deep, the normal machinery of a Thursday night ground forward. But she kept finding herself glancing at the corner booth. And every single time, every time, without exception, he was already looking back. Stop it, she told herself. He is a Marchetti. You know what that means. Whatever it means stop looking at the corner booth. She stopped looking at the corner booth. She was refilling water at table 4 when the front door opened. And everything that had been building under the surface of the evening, the strange pressure, the tilted quality of the air, the way Marco had been standing at the bar watching a man eat lamb for 40 minutes, finally broke through. 3 men walked in, not through the hostess, not waiting to be seated, through the door and straight into the dining room the way people walk into a place they have already decided belongs to them. She clocked them in the half-second of peripheral vision she had while finishing with table 4's water. They weren't dressed for rosarios. They weren't dressed for anything that required effort. The tallest one, heavy-set mid-40s, a face like a fist, was scanning the room with an intensity that had nothing to do with looking for an empty table. Greta stepped forward from the hostess stand. "Good evening, do you have a—" "We're fine," the tall man said without looking at her. He was already looking at the corner booth. Leliana set down the water pitcher. Her heart, which had been behaving normally all evening, suddenly decided to skip a full beat and then compensate aggressively. The tall man started walking toward the back of the restaurant. Marco appeared from nowhere, stepping into his path. "Gentlemen, I'll need to ask you." The tall man didn't stop. He walked around Marco the way you walk around furniture. One of the other 2 men put a hand on Marco's shoulder and Marco went very still. And then the tall man looked across the restaurant and saw what he'd come for, and he smiled, and it was the worst smile Leliana had ever seen on a human face. "Marchetti," he called out. The name landed in the restaurant like a stone into still water silence, spreading outward from the impact in every direction. Conversation stopped. Forks paused between plate and mouth. A child at table 2 asked her mother something, and the mother didn't answer because the mother was frozen. In the corner booth, Alessio Marchetti set down his wine glass. He didn't stand. He didn't tense. He looked at the tall man with an expression of complete, absolute calm, and in that moment, Leliana understood something she hadn't before. She understood why people were afraid of him, not because he was loud, not because he was threatening, because he was. He was still, because whatever was coming toward him right now, 3 men, a restaurant full of witnesses, implications, she was only beginning to understand, it did not move him. And the things that don't move when they should move are always the most dangerous things. "You're going to want to leave," Alessio said. His voice was level, completely level. The voice of someone who has said this before and been listened to. "Not this time," the tall man said. His hand moved inside his jacket. Damn. Leliana was not thinking about what she was doing. She would try to reconstruct it afterward, lying in a hospital bed, and she would not be able to find the thought that preceded the action. There was no thought. There was the tall man's hand moving inside his jacket. There was Alessio in the corner booth, with the table blocking his movement, the wall on his left. No room. No angle, no room, and she understood the geometry of it in a way that bypassed language entirely. She moved. Her feet were already carrying her into the aisle before her brain submitted its opinion on the matter. She stepped directly in front of the tall man, put herself between him and the corner booth, and raised both hands at chest height. "Sir," her voice was steady. She was aware this was insane. "This is a private dining area. I need you to step back." The tall man stared at her. For 1 second, he was genuinely confused, not expecting a woman in a white apron to step out of nowhere and stand between him and what he'd come to do. "Move," he said. "I can't do that," she said. "Lady, sir," his hand came out of the jacket, and then everything happened in the time it takes to blink. A shout from behind her. Alessio's voice, sharp and hard and furious. Movement to her left. The tall man's eyes flicking over her shoulder. The sound. Not a crack, not a bang, a compression, a concussion of air that seemed to come from everywhere at once, and then the white heat in her shoulder, immediate and absolute, like a door slamming open inside her body. The tray she'd been holding hit the floor. The glasses exploded into 100 pieces around her feet. She looked down at her shoulder as if confirming something she'd read about in a book. There was a spreading dark stain on the white of her uniform, and her left arm felt like it belonged to someone else, and her knees were making a decision she hadn't authorized. She went down. The floor was cold. She registered this clearly and almost calmly, the specific temperature of the floor tiles through her uniform. Cold. Smooth. She could feel every seam in the tile beneath her palm. The restaurant was screaming. She could hear it from a great distance, voices cascading over each other, chairs scraping back, running feet, someone near her praying in Spanish, low and fast and fervent. She wanted to tell them she was okay. She wasn't sure if this was true. Then a face was above her. He was on one knee on the floor of his own restaurant with his $1,000 suit jacket open, and his face, his controlled, contained, carefully managed face, stripped of everything it had been wearing all evening. Alessio Marchetti looked at her like she had done something that had no explanation in any world he knew. "Don't move," he said. His voice was rough in a way it hadn't been before, like something in it had been grabbed and wrung out. "I'm all right," she said. "You are not all right." His hand came to the side of her face, not gently, not tenderly, but firmly pressing warmth into her cheek with a directness that said, "Stay here, stay with me, don't go anywhere. Keep your eyes on me, the ambulance is coming. The other man has been handled." She looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means he will not hurt anyone else tonight." A pause. "Or for a considerable time after tonight. You can't just—" "Keep your eyes on me," he said again, and his voice had a quality that made it very difficult not to obey it. She kept her eyes on him. "Why did you do that?" he asked, low, just for her. The pain was enormous now. The initial shock wearing off and the reality taking its place, deep and specific and impossible to set aside. She breathed through it. "I saw his hand move," she said. "You could have walked away." "Yes." "You should have walked away." "Yes," she agreed. "Then why?" "Because you couldn't move." She held his gaze because that was the only available anchor right now. His dark eyes and the warmth of his hand on her face. "The table was in the way. The wall. You didn't have the angle. I could see that from across the room." She paused. "So I moved." He stared at her. "You don't know me," he said. "No," she agreed. "I don't. I could be exactly as terrible as whatever you've been told about me." "Probably," she said. "And you still—" "I saw someone who was going to get hurt," she said quietly, "and I was in a position to stop it. That's all. That's the whole reason." The sirens were louder now. Outside, blue and red light was beginning to wash through the front windows. Somewhere behind Alessio, she could hear Marco's voice and Danny's voice, and the voices of people who were trying to organize the chaos into something manageable. Alessio hadn't moved. His hand was still on her face. His eyes hadn't left hers. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For being here tonight." He said it like it was a specific serious regret, not a social reflex, not politeness, but an actual accounting of cause and consequence. "If I hadn't been here, then someone else might have been hurt," she said. "One of the other servers. A customer. A child at table 2. She paused. "I'd rather it was me." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his expression, something Boston complicated that she didn't have the vocabulary for yet. "That is either very brave," he said quietly, "or very foolish." "My mother always said those were the same things," she said. The paramedics came through the door. He stood. He stepped back. He let them reach her, stood back far enough to give them room, close enough that she could still see him through the motion and the urgency of people with equipment doing their jobs. She watched him take his phone from his pocket. Watched him speak into it, low, fast, completely controlled again, the composed exterior back in place like a mask picked up off the floor and resettled. But his eyes stayed on her, even as the paramedics worked, even as they prepared the stretcher, even as the room continued to fall apart around him, the police arriving, Marco answering questions, the beautiful wreckage of an ordinary Thursday night scattered across the floor in broken glass and pooled red. His eyes never left her. And Leliana Vasquez, who had worked 7 years in this restaurant and had never once taken a shift she wasn't paid for, never once stepped into a situation that wasn't hers, never once put herself between something dangerous and someone she didn't know, lay on the cold floor and looked back at him. She had stepped in front of a bullet for a stranger. She understood now that the stranger was Alessio Marchetti. She was beginning to understand what that name meant. What she did not yet understand, what she had no way of knowing, lying on that floor with his eyes on her, and the paramedics working, and the world she had built carefully and quietly over 34 years, dissolving in real time around her, was that stepping in front of that bullet had not ended something. It had started it. The ambulance ride lasted 19 minutes. Leliana knew this because she counted. Not seconds, she didn't have the focus for seconds. She counted the number of times the paramedic on her left checked her blood pressure, the number of times the one on her right adjusted the oxygen line, the number of turns the vehicle made through streets. She couldn't see but had walked 1,000 times, 19 minutes. She counted because counting was something to do with her mind, while her body was occupied with the serious business of dealing with what had been done to it. The paramedic's name was Torres. He had told her this with the calm efficiency of someone who understood that names help people stay present. Torres, she had repeated back to him, and he had nodded and said, "That's right. Stay with me, Leliana. Talk to me. How old are you? 34. Any medical conditions? No. Medications? Nothing. You're doing great." She wasn't doing great. Her shoulder was a country of its own now, with its own weather system hot and pressurized and sending regular dispatches to the rest of her body that the rest of her body was not equipped to handle. But she understood what Torres was doing and she appreciated it, so she answered every question and kept her breathing even, and did not think about the restaurant or the broken glasses or the way Alessio Marchetti's hand had felt on the side of her face. She was mostly successful at that last part. At the hospital, things happened fast. Fast was good. Fast meant she didn't have time to process anything beyond the immediate. There was a trauma bay and lights that were too bright and 3 different people talking to her at once, and then something in the IV that turned the hot pressurized country in her shoulder into a distant province that she could acknowledge without being governed by. Her sister arrived 40 minutes later. Carmen Vasquez was 2 years younger than Leliana and had been described by every person who met her as the practical one, which was their polite way of saying Carmen processed difficult information by immediately identifying what needed to be done next and doing it. She walked into the recovery bay, looked at Leliana Mall in the hospital bed with her arm immobilized and an IV in her hand and said, "The bullet went clean through. I already talked to the doctor. You have damage to the muscle, but nothing structural. You're going to be fine." "Hello to you too," Leliana said. "I'm saying it first because I need to hear myself say it before I do the other part." Carmen sat down in the chair beside the bed. She was still wearing her work clothes. She'd come straight from the office. She put both hands on her knees and breathed for a moment. Then her eyes filled. "Carmen, don't." Carmen held up one hand. "Give me 30 seconds. Leliana gave her 30 seconds. "Okay," Carmen said. She blinked the tears back with the precise efficiency she brought to everything else. "Now tell me what happened. The whole thing. Don't leave anything out because you think it'll upset me." Leliana told her, the whole thing in order as clearly as she could through the medication and the fatigue. Carmen listened without interrupting, which was itself unusual enough to indicate how seriously she was taking this. When Leliana got to the part about Alessio Marchetti's name, something changed in Carmen's face. "Stop," Carmen said. Leliana stopped. "Marchetti." Carmen said it the way Danny had said it carefully, like the word itself had weight. "Alessio Marchetti was at Rosario's tonight. You know who he is." "Ellie," Carmen leaned forward, "everyone in this city who pays any attention to anything knows who Alessio Marchetti is. He runs his family runs." She stopped, reorganized. His father built half the real estate in Lower Manhattan. His uncle spent 6 years in federal prison for things that were never fully explained at trial. His older brother died 3 years ago in a car accident that the tabloids were very careful about describing as an accident. She paused. "And Alessio has been running the family's business interests for the past 2 years. Leliana looked at the ceiling. "Business interests. That's the polite version. And the impolite version." Carmen was quiet for a moment. "The kind of business that sends 3 men with guns into a restaurant on a Thursday night." Her voice was steady, but her hands on her knees were not. "You stepped in front of a bullet for the head of an Italian crime family, Ellie. Do you understand that?" "I understand it now," Leliana said. "Did you understand it before, Mar?" "I knew the name. I didn't know what the name meant." "And if you had known," Leliana thought about the geometry of the room, the corner booth, the table blocking his movement, the tall man's hand moving inside his jacket, the very clear and specific understanding of what was going to happen next. I don't know, she said honestly. I think I still moved. Carmen stared at her. You think? Carmen, you have a hole in your shoulder. I'm aware. A literal physical hole, a Leliana, where a bullet went through your body. I know where bullets go, because you stepped in front of a man you'd known for less than an hour. The geometry of the room. I don't care about the geometry of the room. Carmen's voice cracked on the last word. She stopped, pressed her lips together. When she spoke again, it was quieter, but no less intense. You scared me. You scared me so much. Marco called me, and I was in a meeting, and I saw his name on my phone, and something in me just, I knew. Before he said a word, I knew something had happened to you. Her hands were shaking now. You're all I have, Ellie. You know that. You have always known that. I know, Leliana said softly. Then act like it. Not angry, something worse than angry, scared. Please act like it. Leliana reached across with her good arm and took her sister's shaking hand. They sat like that for a moment, the machines beeping, the hallway sounds filtering through the half-open door, the specific silence of two people who had spent a lifetime being each other's entire safety net, trying to find the right words for what had just happened. I'm here, Leliana said. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Carmen gripped her hand tighter and didn't respond, which meant she was accepting this on a provisional basis. The door to the recovery bay opened. Not a nurse, not another doctor, not anyone from the hospital at all. A man in a dark suit, mid-40s, with the build of someone who had spent a significant portion of their life being prepared for physical difficulty. He stood in the doorway with his hands visible and his posture carefully non-threatening, which paradoxically made him more threatening because it meant he was aware of the effect he had and was actively managing it. Miss Vasquez, he said, my name is Enzo. Mr. Marchetti sends his regards and wanted me to confirm that you've been seen by the best available. Get out, Carmen said. The man Enzo looked at her without any apparent offense. Ma'am, out. Carmen stood up from her chair. She was 5'4" and had a law degree and the particular intensity of someone who had decided that the appropriate response to fear was aggression. This is a hospital room and my sister has been shot, and whoever sent you can take his regards, and Carmen. Leliana's voice was quiet. Carmen turned. Her eyes said, do not defend these people. Ask him. Uasuina, Leliana said, what happened to the man who did it? Carmen stared at her, then slowly turned back to Enzo. Enzo met her gaze with the same professional composure. The individual responsible is currently in police custody, he said. He will not be a problem. Currently, Carmen said, meaning he's with the police right now, meaning some other arrangement is possible for later. Enzo did not confirm or deny this. His expression said she was not wrong to infer it. Tell your boss, Carmen said, each word very deliberate, that my sister does not need anything from him, and tell him that what happened tonight was an accident of proximity and my sister has no interest in whatever world he occupies. Tell him. Carmen. Leliana said her name more firmly this time. Carmen stopped. What? She said, her voice tight. Leliana looked at Enzo. Tell Mr. Marchetti I appreciate his concern. Tell him I'm fine. Tell him, she paused, choosing. Tell him I hope the lamb was worth it. Something moved in Enzo's expression. Just briefly. I'll convey that, he said. And something about the way he said it suggested that specific message was going to be delivered with considerable personal enjoyment. He nodded to them both and left. Carmen turned to Leliana with an expression that combined disbelief, exasperation, and the specific resignation of someone who has been having some version of this conversation with their sister their entire life. The lamb was worth it, Carmen repeated. It seemed like the right thing to say. You have a hole in your shoulder. You keep mentioning that. I'm going to keep mentioning it indefinitely. Carmen sat back down. She was quiet for a moment. Then he sent someone to the hospital within the hour. Yes. That's not nothing. No, Leliana agreed. It's not nothing. Carmen looked at the door where Enzo had been standing. Her practical mind was working. Leliana could see it working the way it always had, processing implications and consequences in rapid sequence. This is not over, Carmen said. Whatever tonight was, it's not over. Liliana looked at her shoulder, at the white bandaging, the IV, the blinking monitors, at her hands, which were still steady, which she still found faintly remarkable. No, she said, I don't think it is. She was discharged the next afternoon with a prescription, a list of physical therapy recommendations and instructions not to carry anything heavier than a coffee cup with her left arm for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. She had bills due in 3. She had exactly 11 days of sick leave accumulated. She did the math in the cab on the way home and arrived at a number that was not good and then set it aside because there was nothing to be done about it yet. Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that had an elevator that worked approximately 60% of the time. Today was the 40%. She took the stairs slowly, her right hand on the railing, her shoulder reporting from its distant province with increasing frequency now that the hospital medication was wearing off. She was on the 3rd floor landing when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer it. She answered it. How are the stairs? Said Alessio Marchetti. She stopped walking. Her hand tightened on the railing. I'm sorry, she said. You have 4 floors and an unreliable elevator, he said. I imagine the stairs are difficult today. How do you know I have 4 floors and an unreliable elevator? A pause that was not quite a silence, more like the pause of someone who is deciding how much to explain. I wanted to make sure you arrived home safely. You had someone follow me from the hospital. I had someone make sure you arrived home safely, he repeated with a precision that technically distinguished the two things without meaningfully separating them. She stood on the 3rd floor landing with her arm in a sling and her shoulder aching and the absurdity of this conversation registering in layers. Mr. Marchetti, Alessio, I appreciate the concern, I do, but I don't need... Someone tried to kill me last night, he said. You prevented it. You were hurt as a direct result of my presence in that restaurant. His voice was level, but under the levelness, there was something with more weight, something that had been working on him for the hours since she'd last seen his face. What you need is not entirely your decision to make at this point. I think you'll find that's exactly whose decision it is. Liliana. The way he said her name was different on the phone. In the restaurant, it had been an experiment, a testing. On the phone, it was something else familiar and careful at the same time, like something he had been saying in his head and was now saying aloud for the first time. I am not trying to own anything. I am trying to... He stopped. She heard him stop, heard the pause of a man who had reached for a word and found the options insufficient. I owe you something, he said finally. That is not a social nicety. That is a fact of how I live my life. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything, he said, and it was so direct and so without decoration that she had to take a breath. I was sitting in that corner booth with no room to move and a man with a gun 3 steps away. You know what would have happened. You were the one person in that room who could do the math fast enough and the only person who chose to act on it. A beat. You saved my life. She leaned her good shoulder against the wall of the 3rd floor landing. And now I would like to know that you are safe, that your injury is being properly managed, that you do not have financial concerns resulting from being unable to work. A pause. And I would like to do this without your very formidable sister threatening legal action against anyone I send. Something happened in Liliana's chest that she was not prepared for, a warmth that she understood immediately and did not want. Because warmth in this direction was not safe, and she was standing on a 3rd floor landing with a bullet hole in her shoulder, having just been told that a man she met 19 hours ago had tracked her home, which was alarming, and was also somehow the most cared for she had felt in a very long time, which was worse. The stairs are fine, she said. Liliana, I can manage my own situation. I know you can. He said it without argument, without condescension. Simply, I know. I watched you manage a restaurant full of people for an hour before everything happened. I know exactly what you're capable of managing. Another pause. I am still asking. She looked up the last flight of stairs. Her shoulder sent a strong editorial opinion about the next 30 seconds. I have everything I need, she said. The silence on the line had a specific quality. Your door, he said finally. When you get to it, look at it before you open it. She frowned. What? Just look at it before you open it. His voice was back to level. I'll call again tomorrow to see how you're managing. He hung up. She stood on the landing, for a moment phone in hand, several things happening simultaneously in her mind. Then she climbed the last flight of stairs. She stopped in front of her apartment door. On the floor, arranged with a precision that made it clear this had not been left by a delivery service, was a set of items, a paper bag from the pharmacy 2 blocks away, containing the exact prescription she had been given at the hospital, already filled. She discovered when she opened it a smaller bag from the deli on the corner with soup and bread and the specific kind of crackers she had mentioned to no one, and a single folded note. She picked up the note, 3 lines handwritten in a script that was compressed and angular. The man who shot you will not be a problem. Your medical bills will not be a problem. You did something last night that I don't have the right words for. Rest. No signature. She stood at her door for a long time. Then she went inside, sat down on her couch, ate the soup with her good hand, and thought about a man she had known for one evening who had somehow learned which pharmacy was 2 blocks from her apartment and which crackers she preferred. And she thought about the words, "You did something last night that I don't have the right words for." And she thought about the geometry of that corner booth and the way his face had looked stripped bare on the floor of the restaurant. And she told herself very firmly that the way she was feeling right now was a direct result of pain medication and trauma and exhaustion. She told herself this 3 times. She was not certain she believed it. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. A different unknown number from the one he'd call from. A single line, "Sleep. The stairs will be easier tomorrow." She put the phone face down on the coffee table. She closed her eyes. She was asleep in 4 minutes, which was either the medication or exhaustion, or the specific peace that comes from knowing whatever else was true and whatever else was complicated and whatever else was dangerous is that someone was watching the stairs. She woke at 2 in the morning. Not from the pain, though the pain was present. Not from a dream, though she had been dreaming something. She couldn't hold on to fragments of restaurant noise and broken glass and a face above hers in the dark. She woke because her phone was ringing. Carmen. She answered immediately. "He paid your hospital bill," Carmen said without preamble, her voice carrying the quality of someone who had been sitting with a piece of information for several hours deciding how to deliver it. "The full bill. It was processed at 11:14 tonight. The hospital called me because I was listed as your emergency contact and they wanted to confirm your insurance information. And the woman told me the balance had already been settled, and I asked by whom, and she said by a private account, and gave me a confirmation number, and Ellie." "Carmen, it was $43,000. Carmen's voice broke on the number and reconstructed itself immediately. $43,000, Ellie. One transaction, 11:14 p.m., while you were sleeping." Leliana sat up on the couch. Her shoulder protested. She breathed through it. "Carmen," she said carefully, "I need you to listen to me." "I'm listening. I have been listening. I have been listening since 7:30 last night when Marco called me, and I have not stopped listening, and none of what I'm hearing is okay." "I know. Because this man does not pay $43,000 hospital bills for waitresses he met for an hour, Ellie. People like him don't do things without reasons. People like him don't do anything without—" "Carmen." Leliana kept her voice steady. "I know." A silence. "What are you going to do?" Carmen asked. Leliana looked at the prescription bag on her coffee table, at the soup container, at the crackers, at the note she had folded and left on the armrest, 3 lines in compressed angular script. "I don't know yet," she said. "That scares me." "I know that too." Another silence, longer this time. Outside her window, the city was doing what the city always did at 2 in the morning, continuing indifferent, full of other people's stories. "He's going to want something," Carmen said finally. "Men like that always want something." "Maybe," Leliana said. "Not maybe. Definitely. The only question is what?" Leliana thought about this. She thought about a voice on the phone saying, "I owe you everything," with the flatness of a man reporting a fact. She thought about eyes in a corner booth that had been on her from the moment she walked across a restaurant, and eyes on the floor of that same restaurant, watching her being loaded onto a stretcher with an expression she still didn't have the vocabulary for. "Then I suppose," she said slowly, "I'm going to have to find out." Carmen made a sound. "I hate this." "I know. Call me tomorrow." "First thing." "Ellie." Her sister's voice, the last word before she hung up, carried everything it always carried, the whole weight of two women who had built their lives on being each other's last line of defense. Be careful. I will, she said. She sat in the dark of her apartment with the city sounds filtering through the windows, the prescription bag on the table, the $43,000 fax sitting in the middle of her mind like a stone she couldn't look away from. Alessio Marchetti had paid her hospital bill at 11:14 p.m. She had told him she didn't need anything from him. He had done it anyway. Not as a power move, she turned this over, tested it, examined it from several angles. Not the way powerful people sometimes spent money to establish ownership over situations and people. Something else. Something that sat closer to the note. You did something last night that I don't have the right words for. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number, a third unknown number. She was beginning to understand that this was simply how he operated, never the same number twice, always a different line, the careful habits of a man who lived in a world where traceable patterns were liabilities. A text this time. 3 words. Are you sleeping? She looked at it for a long moment. Then she typed back, you paid my hospital bill. His response came in under 10 seconds. Yes, I didn't ask you to do that. No, I'm not comfortable with it. The 3 dots that meant he was typing appeared and disappeared twice. Then I know. I did it anyway. You can be uncomfortable with it. That's allowed. She stared at that for a moment. The directness of it. The complete absence of apology or justification, not cold but honest. The way someone is honest when they have decided the situation doesn't have room for anything else. She typed, why the dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. She watched them for what felt like a very long time. His answer when it came was 4 words. Because you didn't hesitate. Leliana set the phone down on the couch beside her. She looked at the ceiling of her apartment, the familiar water stain in the corner, the crack along the north wall that her landlord had been promising to fix. Since 2021, the ceiling she had looked at through 1,000 ordinary nights and 1 sleepless one, and now this one. She picked the phone back up, typed, good night, Alessio. 3 seconds. Good night, Leliana. The stairs will be easier tomorrow, I made sure of it. She almost asked what that meant. She decided she would find out in the morning. She lay back down on the couch because the bedroom felt too far and closed her eyes, and this time when she slept, there were no fragments of broken glass. Only the sound of a voice on a phone saying, I owe you everything, and the cold floor of the restaurant becoming somehow in the geography of her sleeping mind not cold at all. The stairs were easier in the morning. Not because her shoulder hurt less, it hurt more the deep, specific ache of a body doing the serious work of repairing itself, the kind of pain that made itself known with every breath and every movement and didn't apologize for the interruption. But when she opened her apartment door at 8:15 a.m. and looked at the stairwell, she found that someone had installed a second handrail on the right side overnight. Bolted cleanly into the wall, the hardware still bright and unchipped, the kind of job that looked like it had been done by a professional who had been called at an unreasonable hour and hadn't complained about it. She stood at the top of the stairs for a long moment. Then she laughed, quietly to herself with her good hand over her mouth, because it was either laugh or feel something else entirely, and she wasn't ready for the something else. She used the new handrail on the way down. Carmen called at 8:43, which was actually later than Leliana had expected. There's a car outside your building, Carmen said in lieu of hello. I see it. Black, new. The driver is standing next to it, looking like he was assembled by the same factory that made the man who came to the hospital. His name is Enzo. I don't care what his name is. Are you getting in it? Leliana stood on the sidewalk, her good arm wrapped around herself against the morning air, looking at the car. Enzo, or someone exactly like Enzo, stood beside it with his hands visible and his expression carefully neutral. On the windshield, tucked under the wiper blade, was a small envelope. She walked over and took the envelope. Ellie, Carmen said, her voice careful now. What are you doing if they're reading a note? Inside the envelope, the same compressed angular script. Physical therapy at 9. Dr. Ferrara, 34 East, 61st. He's expecting you. The car is yours for the day, not mine, not an obligation, just a car. You can walk if you prefer. But the stairs were hard on you yesterday, and I thought you shouldn't have to manage everything alone today. She read it twice. Ellie. Carmen again. What does it say? He arranged physical therapy. Silence. Then of course he did. Carmen, I'm not saying don't go. I'm a lawyer, not an idiot. Physical therapy is practical and you need it. A pause. I'm saying be careful about what you let this become. Every time you accept something from a man like that, the transaction gets more complicated. I know. Do you buy him? Yes, she said. And then because it was Carmen and Carmen deserved honesty, I'm trying to. She got in the car. Dr. Ferrara's office was on the kind of block where the buildings had doormen and the doormen had opinions. The waiting room had 2 patients in it when she arrived, both of whom left within minutes, and she couldn't tell if that was coincidence or something else. She decided not to think about it. Dr. Ferrara was 60 precise and treated her shoulder with the focused competence of someone for whom the question of who had sent her was entirely separate from the question of how to fix what was wrong with her. He spoke to her about recovery timelines, about muscle repair, about what she could and couldn't do for the next 8 weeks. He was direct and clear and didn't fill silences with noise, which she appreciated. At the end of the appointment, he said, "The person who arranged this visit wanted me to tell you that you are welcome to come back twice a week for as long as necessary. Costs are handled." She looked at him. Did he say anything else? Dr. Ferrara considered this. He said, and I'm quoting, that the patient is stubborn and may argue about accepting care, and that if she argues, I should remind her that accepting necessary medical treatment is not the same as accepting an obligation. He paused. He seemed to feel strongly about that distinction. Something moved through her chest. She controlled it. Thank you, Dr. Ferrara. Twice a week, he said. I mean it. The car was waiting. She got in and the driver, not Enzo, someone younger, asked where she'd like to go. She gave him her apartment address. He nodded and drove and said nothing else, which was the right call. Her phone buzzed at 11:30. This time she recognized the pattern in the number. Not the same number, never the same number, but always 11 digits, always starting the same way. She had started to think of it as his signature. The way some people announce themselves with a ringtone or a specific text style, this was how Alessio Marchetti announced himself. A number she'd never seen before that she somehow already knew. How was Ferrara, he asked. Good, she said. Professional. He told me what you said about stubborn patients. It seemed relevant to include. You had them clear the waiting room. A beat. You noticed. I noticed things, she said. It's why I was good at Maitram. What I was, he repeated, past tense. She hadn't meant to say it that way. The word had slipped out, carrying more weight than she'd intended. Because the truth was, she had not yet let herself think fully about what came next, about the 6 weeks in a sling, the bills she could manage, and the ones she couldn't, the restaurant, and whether Rosario's would hold her position or decide that a Thursday night shooting was grounds for a quiet restructuring. I'll go back, she said. You don't have to. I want to. Why, totally, not challenging, genuinely asking. The same quality of attention he'd brought to everything since the first moment she'd stood at his table, like her answer actually mattered, like he was storing it somewhere. Because I'm good at it, she said, and because it's mine, I built that section over 7 years. The regulars at table 6 know my name. The kitchen staff saves me the good pasta before the dinner rush. I'm not walking away from that because of one night. A silence. Then table 6, the couple in their 60s. The wife laughed at something you said to them. She stopped. You watched that. I watched everything he said. And the way he said it, not predatory, not possessive, but with a simple factual quality that was somehow more unsettling than either sat in the air between them. That's a strange thing to admit, she said. I know, I'm admitting it anyway. A pause. You were the most interesting person in the room. I was carrying other people's food. Yes, he said, and you were doing it like it mattered, like every single person at every single table was someone worth doing it well for. He stopped. When he continued, his voice was quieter. I don't meet many people who live like that. She didn't answer for a moment. Outside her window, the city moved at its usual speed, indifferent and continuous. Alessio, she said. Yes. What happened to the man who shot me? The question had been sitting in her since last night. Since Enzo in the hospital doorway saying he will not be a problem with the specific absence of detail that meant the detail was not for her. The silence on the line had a texture to it. He's in custody, Alicio said. Police custody. Yes. For now, she said. Another pause. Longer. He made a decision to walk into a restaurant and discharge a weapon in a room full of civilians. Whatever happens to him next is a direct consequence of that decision. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It's not. I need to understand what she stopped, chose the next word carefully. What I'm adjacent to, what last Thursday night made me adjacent to. The silence this time was the longest yet. She heard him breathe a single controlled exhale. The sound of a man deciding how much of a locked room to open. The man's name is Vitale, he said. He worked for a man named Caselli, Domenico Caselli. Are you writing this down? No. You should probably write this down. I'll remember it. A brief pause that she interpreted as reluctant respect. Caselli has been trying to acquire certain properties that my family owns. Legitimate properties, real estate, nothing that should involve men with guns. But Caselli is not a patient man, and he made a decision to accelerate the negotiation. His voice was flat and informational, a man reading a report. He sent Vitale and 2 others to deliver a message. The message was not supposed to involve civilian casualties. Vitale made independent decisions. And Caselli is being dealt with. By whom? By people whose job it is to deal with such things. She pressed by you. Oh. The pause was its own answer. Leliana. His voice shifted, not soft but direct the way it went when he was saying something he considered important. There are parts of my world that I am not going to explain to you. Not because I think you can't handle them, because the less you know about certain specifics, the safer you are. That is not a control tactic. That is a practical fact. And if I told you I don't accept that, then I would say that your instinct for self-determination is one of the things I find most... He stopped. A pause with weight in it. One of the things I respect most, and I would still not tell you. She wanted to argue with that. She found that she couldn't entirely because the logic of it was sound, and she was honest enough to recognize sound logic even when she didn't like it. What do you want from me? She asked. The question she had been carrying since Carmen had asked it at 2 in the morning. The question that had been underneath every text, every note, every handrail and prescription bag and car. She asked it now because the medication had worn off and the morning was clear, and she was not someone who let important questions stay unasked. Silence. Nothing, he said. That's not true. No, he said. It's not entirely true. Another pause. I want to know that you're all right. I want to know that what happened Thursday night hasn't cost you things that can't be replaced. He stopped again. She was beginning to understand that these stops were not hesitation in the usual sense. They were the pauses of a man who chose every word with the care of someone who had learned that words once released couldn't be taken back. I want to see you, he said, when you're well enough, in a different kind of room than a restaurant floor. She absorbed this. That's not nothing, she said. No, he agreed quietly. It's not nothing. She was quiet for a moment. The car had stopped outside her building. The driver was waiting without any appearance of impatience, which she understood now was a professional skill. Among the people in Alicio's orbit, the ability to wait without leaking the waiting. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. She went upstairs, used the new handrail, stood in her apartment and stood in the silence of it, and thought about a man who had the resources to pay $43,000 at 11 p.m. and the impulse to bolt a handrail to a stranger's wall, and somehow both things felt more intimate than either of them should. She called Carmen. He wants to see me, she said. Carmen was quiet for 3 full seconds, which was a lifetime for Carmen. And I said I'd think about it. Okay. Carmen's voice was careful. Okay, tell me not as your sister, as someone who needs to think clearly about this. Do you want to see him? The honest answer came immediately, and she looked at it for a moment before she said it out loud. Yes. Why? Because I keep trying to make him fit into a box and he keeps not fitting, she said. Because every time I think I understand what he is, he does something that doesn't match what I think he is. Because... She stopped. Because you took a bullet for him, And part of you needs to understand who you took it for, Carmen said quietly. The accuracy of that landed somewhere central. Yes, that's human, Carmen said. That's completely human. A pause. It's also exactly the psychological dynamic that makes what he's doing very effective, whether he's doing it deliberately or not. I know. So you go in with your eyes open, all the way open, all the way, Eleliana agreed. She spent the afternoon the way she had spent 100 afternoons recovering from smaller injuries, carefully managing what she could manage, leaving the rest. She paid the bills she could pay. She called Marco, who answered on the first ring, with a relief in his voice she hadn't expected. I was going to call you, he said immediately. How are you? Be honest. I'm managing, she said. Marco, my position is yours, he said before she finished the sentence. Eleliana, that table has your name on it as far as I'm concerned. You take the time you need and you come back when Ferrara says you're ready. She breathed out. Thank you. Don't thank me. His voice was rough. I've known you for 7 years. He stopped. I should have never put you on that booth. You didn't know what was going to happen. I knew enough. A pause. I knew enough to know it was a situation I shouldn't have put any of my staff in. I'm sorry, Eleliana. I mean it. She sat with that for a moment. Marco, it wasn't your fault. No, he said, but it's my responsibility. He paused. He came back, you know. She went very still. Husso, Marchetti, next morning, before we opened, he came in with 2 men and walked the entire room and then sat in the corner booth and sat there for about 20 minutes, not doing anything, just sitting. Marco's voice was careful. Then he left an envelope at the host stand. I haven't opened it. What kind of envelope? The thick kind, Marco said. The kind that makes you feel like you should call a lawyer before you open it. The call ended 20 minutes later, with Marco promising to hold her section and Eleliana promising to be back inside 6 weeks. She put the phone down and looked at the ceiling and thought about Alessio Marchetti sitting alone in the corner booth the morning after in a closed restaurant, with the lights probably still half up, sitting where everything had happened. Just sitting, not doing anything. Just sitting in the place where a woman he didn't know had thrown herself between him and a bullet, and whatever he had been doing in those 20 minutes. Whatever a man like that did in the private interior of his own mind when he thought he was unobserved, she would have given a great deal to know. At 6 p.m., her phone rang with another new number. She answered it and said before he could speak, "Why did you go back to the restaurant?" A pause. Marco told you. Marco told me. Silence, then quiet and direct. I wanted to see where you fell. She didn't have an immediate response to that. The plainness of it hit her somewhere she wasn't defended against. She stopped. I know how it sounds, he said. It sounds honest, she said. Yes. A beat. I sat there and I looked at the floor and I thought about 20 different decisions I made in the past 3 years that led to me being in that restaurant on that particular Thursday night. I thought about which one to regret most. His voice was controlled, but she could hear the thing underneath it, the thing that had been underneath it since the floor of the restaurant. The quality of a man carrying weight he had been carrying quietly for a long time. I haven't decided yet. Alessio? She said his name the way she was beginning to say it, not as an address, but as a way of making sure he was still there, still present, still the person she was building her understanding of. What happened Thursday night was not your fault. A man came to kill me in a room full of people, he said. One of those people has a hole in her shoulder. It is entirely my fault. I made a choice. You made a choice that you shouldn't have had to make. His voice hardened slightly, not at her, she understood, at the situation, at himself. And I am not able to, he stopped. I don't do well with debts I can't repay. It's not a debt. It is to me. Firm, final. Everything is either a debt or a gift. What you did was too large to be a gift. So it's a debt, and I will find a way to repay it. She thought about arguing the philosophy of this. She decided it wasn't the moment. And in the meantime, he said, I'd like you to be somewhere safe. The word sat in the air. She heard it properly, not as an abstraction, not as a social precaution, but as something with immediate meaning. Alessio, why does safe need to be specified? A silence. Caselli knows you exist now, he said. The bottom dropped out of something, and what? Her voice was very level, which she recognized as her body's response to things that were too large to respond to with volume. He knows a civilian intervened. He knows a woman was shot and survived. He doesn't know your name. A pause. He didn't know it as of this morning. As of this morning, she repeated. I am handling it. You are, she stopped, reconstructed. A man sent 3 people to shoot you, and now he knows I exist and you're telling me you're handling it. Yes, that is spectacularly insufficient information. I know. And here his voice changed completely, the controlled flatness gone, and what replaced it was something she hadn't heard from him before. Something urgent, something that on a man with less control would have sounded like fear. Liliana, I need you to listen to me right now and argue with me afterward in that order. Can you do that? Her heart was moving fast. She controlled it. Yes. I have a house, not in the city north 2 hours, private, staffed. It is the most secure private property I own, and it is the last place Caselli would look for anyone connected to me because it doesn't appear in any record with my name on it. A pause. I want you to go there, not permanently, not as a prisoner, not as anything other than a person who did something for me and has consequently ended up in my radius and deserves to be protected until this situation is resolved. The silence in her apartment had a new quality now, not the comfortable silence of the morning, the silence of a map being redrawn. And Carmen, she said, if she'll come, yes, she should probably come. She'll never agree. I think he said carefully that when you explain to your sister that a man who sends people into restaurants to resolve business disputes now knows her sister is alive and connected to me, she will agree. Liliana stood up, moved to the window, looked at the street below, the ordinary evening, street people walking dogs, a couple arguing mildly outside the deli, a cab making a turn that was probably the illegal. Her city, her ordinary, loud, indifferent, beloved city. How long, she asked? A week, maybe 2, until Caselli is no longer a variable. She thought about what until Caselli is no longer a variable probably meant. She made the decision not to ask directly because she understood now what Alessio had meant about certain specifics in safety, and she was, if nothing else, a person who learned quickly. And you, she asked instead, where will you be? A pause. I'll be there. Something moved through her. She turned it over, examined it, set it carefully to the side, because this was not the moment for it, whatever it was. Give me an hour, she said. Take what you need. An hour, she repeated, and Alessio. Yes. When this is over, when it's resolved and I'm back in my apartment and the situation is handled, you and I are going to have a very long and completely honest conversation about what my life is and what your life is and what the distance between those two things looks like. A silence. Long enough that she wondered if she'd miscalculated. Then, I'd like that, he said, and the way he said it stripped of everything, just 3 words, and the fact of them told her more than an hour of conversation would have. She called Carmen. Carmen picked up on the second ring. Liliana told her everything fast without softening it, the way Carmen had always needed information delivered. Caselli, the timing, the house, all of it. Carmen was quiet for a long time after she finished. He'll be there, Carmen said, not a question. Yes. Another silence. Then Carmen said with the precise specificity of someone who has identified the most important variable in a complex equation. Ellie, do you trust him? She thought about a handrail bolted to a wall overnight, about a note that said, you did something last night that I don't have the right words for, about a man sitting alone in a closed restaurant looking at the floor where she had fallen, about eyes that had never left her. Not once. I don't know him well enough to trust him completely, she said honestly. But I think, she stopped, found the right words. I think he is someone who means what he says. And right now he is saying that he will keep me safe. And I believe him. Carmen exhaled slowly. Pack enough for 2 weeks. I'll be there in 40 minutes. The line went quiet. Liliana stood in her apartment for one last moment. Her apartment, her water stain on the ceiling, her view of the street, her ordinary life that had been ordinary until a Thursday night when she had stepped into an aisle and the world had reorganized itself entirely around that single decision. She went to her bedroom and started to pack. And somewhere north of the city, in a house that didn't appear in any record with his name on it, Alessio Marchetti was waiting. The drive north took 2 hours and 14 minutes, and Carmen spent most of it not talking, which meant she was thinking at full capacity, which meant Eleliana led her. Enzo drove. The same Enzo from the hospital who had apparently been reassigned to them permanently, or at least until further notice. He drove the way he did everything with professional competence and a complete absence of unnecessary communication. Carmen had gotten into the car, looked at him once, and decided to treat him like furniture. Enzo seemed entirely comfortable with this arrangement. The city thinned out behind them. The buildings got smaller and then stopped. Trees came. Eleliana watched them through the window with her good arm across her lap and her sling pressing into her side, and thought about all the ways a life could change direction in under a week. 6 days ago, she had been carrying a tray of espressos. She was in a car with tinted windows being driven to a safe house belonging to a man whose last name made restaurant managers forget how to breathe. "Say something," she told Carmen. "I'm thinking," Carmen said. "You've been thinking for an hour and 40 minutes. It's a complicated situation. Tell me what you're thinking." Carmen turned from the window. Her expression was the one she used in professional settings, controlled analytical, but with something underneath it that only Eleliana could read, something that was not analytical at all. "I'm thinking about our mother," she said. Eleliana hadn't expected that. "Why, Diaco?" "Because she would have done the same thing you did," Carmen said, stepped in front of it. Not thought about it first, just moved. She paused. She would have also ended up in a car going to a safe house owned by someone dangerous, and she would have been completely calm about it, and I would have been losing my mind in the seat beside her. Leliana looked at her sister. "Is that what's happening right now?" "I'm very calmly losing my mind," Carmen confirmed. "Yes." They rode in silence for another 10 minutes. Then Carmen said quietly, "She would have liked him, you know, the way you describe him. She always had a weakness for people who meant what they said." But Leliana did not respond to that because there was no response to it that didn't open a door she wasn't ready to walk through yet. The house appeared at the end of a long private drive, and Leliana's first understanding of it was not visual, but physical. The way the air changed, the way the sound of the car changed on the road surface, the sense of crossing from one kind of world into another. And then she saw it, and whatever she had been imagining, it was not this. It was large, without being aggressive about it. Stone and glass, old bones, and modern renovation. The kind of structure that had been built by someone who intended it to last, and then updated by someone who understood that lasting and living were not always the same requirement. There were lights on inside, warm against the early evening, and two men she didn't recognize, standing at a distance that was professional without being intimidating. Alessio was at the door. Not waiting at the door in any dramatic sense, he was simply there when they arrived, as if he had timed his own movement to coincide with theirs, which she suspected he probably had. Dark jacket, no tie, something slightly different about him in this context that she couldn't immediately name. Then she understood he was on his own ground. The careful containment he wore in public was still present, but looser here, like a coat worn open instead of buttoned. He looked at her the moment she got out of the car, and the look lasted exactly long enough to be something. Then he looked at Carmen, and his expression became something more careful and deliberate. "Ms. Vasquez," he said. "Mr. Marchetti," Carmen said in a tone that communicated the entire contents of the past 6 days in 2 words. "I appreciate that you came," he said. "I came for my sister," Carmen said. "Not for you. I want to be clear about that." "Completely clear," he said. "Inappropriate." He held the door open. "Please come in." Carmen walked past him with her chin at a specific angle that Leliana recognized as her sister's version of armor. Leliana followed, and when she passed him in the doorway close enough that she could have reached out, he said very quietly, "Just for her, how's the shoulder? Manageable?" She said equally quiet. "Ferrara's notes say you didn't take the full dose of the prescription." She stopped, turned. "He reports to you." "I asked him to keep me informed of your recovery. He told me you were reducing the pain medication." "I don't like how it makes me feel." "It makes you feel less pain." "It makes me feel less everything," she said. "I'd rather feel the pain and stay sharp." He looked at her for a moment. That look again, the one she was beginning to map, the one that appeared when she said something that didn't fit his existing categories. Then he said, I'll have Ferrara call you directly about alternatives. You don't need to. I know I don't need to, he said. I'm going to. She walked inside. The interior had a staff, 3 people she clocked immediately present, but unobtrusive in the specific way of people who have been trained to be present and unobtrusive. A woman named Sophia showed them to their rooms. Carmen's was at one end of the second floor, Leliana's at the other, which Carmen noted with an expression, and then chose not to comment on, which was itself a comment. Dinner was at 8, a real meal served at a real table, which Leliana found both comfortable and surreal. The 4 of them, including Enzo, who ate at the same table without apparent self-consciousness, passing bread and discussing song. Nothing of consequence, while everything of consequence sat in the middle of the room unaddressed. It was Carmen who addressed it. Caselli, she said between the main course and whatever came after it. Tell me specifically what the threat level is. Alessio looked at her with what Leliana was beginning to recognize as genuine respect, the particular respect of someone who valued directness enough to recognize it even when it was pointed at him. He knows a woman was involved Thursday night. He has a physical description. He doesn't have a name. How long until he has a name? Carmen asked. My people are working to make sure he doesn't get one. That's not a timeline. No, he agreed. It's not. 48 hours, possibly 72. After that, the situation with Caselli himself will be resolved, and the question of the name becomes irrelevant. Resolved, Carmen said the way she said the word when she was identifying its real meaning. Resolved, Alessio confirmed, and his voice made clear that the definition he was working with was the comprehensive one. Carmen set down her fork. I'm a lawyer. There are things you can tell me and things you can't tell me. I understand that. What I need to understand is whether my sister is safe in this house for the next 72 hours. Yes, he said, without qualification, without the layered, careful pauses he brought to most things. One word: immediate and absolute. Carmen looked at him for a long moment. Leliana watched her sister's face do the work it did, processing, evaluating, calculating. All right, Carmen said finally. She picked her fork back up. Then we eat. After dinner, Carmen pleaded exhaustion and went upstairs. The exhaustion was real. Leliana could see it, the particular depletion of someone who had been managing fear for 6 days straight. But it was also deliberate, and the deliberateness of it said, I'm giving you room. I'm not endorsing anything, but I'm giving you room. She found herself on the back porch with Alessio, which was not planned and felt entirely inevitable. The night was clear and cold, and she was wearing a jacket that Sophia had produced from somewhere in the house that fit her almost exactly, which she was choosing not to analyze. Her shoulder ached with its steady, informative ache. She stood with her good arm on the railing and breathed the cold air and felt for the first time since Thursday something loosening in her chest. She's remarkable, Alessio said, meaning Carmen. She terrifies most people, Leliana said. Yes, that's what I mean. He was standing a comfortable distance from her, leaning on the railing with his forearms, looking at the dark. She walked into this house and she evaluated every single person in it before she sat down. She found the exits before dinner. She positioned herself at the table where she could see both doors. She was pre-law, Leliana said. Before law, she was the kind of child who read the evacuation route on every airplane that she got on. She learned that somewhere. We both did. Right, she paused. Our neighborhood wasn't quiet when we were growing up. You learned to read rooms. He turned his head slightly toward her. Is that where it comes from? What you did Thursday? Partly, she said. Partly it's just... She looked for the words. I've always been the person who moved. In every room I've ever been in, when something was about to happen, I was already moving before I knew I was moving. That's not a small thing. It got me shot. It saved my life, he said. Simple, direct, no decoration. They were quiet for a moment. Tell me something true about yourself, she said. Not about the situation, not about Caselli or Thursday night. Something that's just you. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, I haven't slept more than 4 hours at a time in 3 years. She looked at him. Since my brother died, he said. Before that, I slept fine. After, my mind won't stop at night. It goes through everything. Every decision, every variable, every possible consequence of every choice I made that day. He paused. I've gotten used to it. That's not something you get used to, she said quietly. That's something you carry. He looked at her. Yes, he said. It is. What was his name, your brother? Marco, he said, and something moved across his face. His name was Marco. What happened? The silence had weight. He was in a car, a road that shouldn't have been dangerous. It was raining. He stopped. The official story is an accident. The rain, the road, bad luck. Another pause. I don't believe the official story. And the real story is one of several things I have been working on for 3 years, he said. One of several reasons why men like Caselli find me inconvenient to have around. She absorbed this, the shape of it. 3 years of 4-hour nights carrying the weight of a brother's death, and the knowledge that it wasn't what they said it was, and the specific kind of grief that couldn't fully grieve because it was also a problem to be solved. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be. Not with that face. His voice was rougher than usual. People say it, and they mean well, but they don't. He stopped. You say it, and it sounds like you actually understand what you're sorry for. I do, she said. We lost our mother 4 years ago, not violently illness, but the way you can't fully mourn something because you're too busy managing the aftermath. The way grief becomes administrative when you're the person who holds things together. She paused. I know that particular weight. He looked at her for a long moment. You do, he said, and it wasn't a question. I do. The cold air moved between them. Somewhere in the dark, the two men at their professional distance maintained their professional distance. And inside the house, Carmen was probably lying awake doing exactly what Alicio had described, going through every variable, every decision. The household and the world it represented existed around them in every direction. But here on this particular piece of railing, something else was happening. I don't talk about Marco, he said, to anyone. I know, she said, though she hadn't known until he said it. You didn't have to. I know I didn't have to. He was looking at the dark again. I wanted to. She didn't answer that. She didn't need to. They stood in the cold for another 20 minutes and not talking much, and it was the most comfortable silence she had experienced with another person in a very long time. She went to bed at 11. She lay in the dark and thought about a man who hadn't slept properly in 3 years. And she thought about her mother, and she thought about Carmen positioning herself at the table to see both doors, and she thought about the geometry of a corner booth, and how one step to the left had redrawn every map she had. She slept, deeply and without fragments. She woke at 6:15 to raise voices somewhere below her. She was on her feet before she was fully awake, moving toward the door, with her heart already running the shoulder, sending sharp protest at the sudden movement that she ignored completely. The voices were in the front of the house. She could hear Alessio not loud, but with a quality she had heard once before on Thursday night when he had told 3 men they needed to leave and they had not left. The voice of a man who was maintaining control at considerable personal effort. And another voice, a voice she didn't recognize. Older, rougher, with an accent that was Italian but different from Alicio's regional, she thought further south. She was at the top of the stairs when Carmen appeared from the other end of the hall, already dressed, her expression completely alert. Do you know who that is? Carmen asked quietly. No. They looked at each other. Then Carmen said, stay here. Absolutely not, Liliana said and went down the stairs. The front room held 4 people. Alessio standing at the center with his stillness fully deployed. Enzo near the wall at a specific attention that was not quite readiness and not quite not. A man she didn't know, 60s heavy-set, the kind of physical authority that came from decades of being the person other people moved out of the way for, and behind him at the door, a younger man keeping his hands visible, with the practiced ease of someone who understood that visible hands were a communication. The older man looked at Liliana when she came down the stairs. Alessio's eyes moved to her immediately. Something in his face said, you should not be here. Something else in his face said, I knew you would come anyway. This is her, the older man said, not to Alessio, to the room. This is none of your business, Alessio said, and his voice was ice. This is exactly my business. The man turned back to Alessio. You want to tell me you had a civilian woman in the middle of a Caselli operation and I wasn't informed? You want to tell me that someone outside the family knows your face and your name and your business and you brought her here to this house? Watch how you're speaking, Alessio said. I'll speak how I like. I'm speaking for the council, Alessio, not as your uncle, as the council. He paused to let that land. There are protocols. There are reasons for the protocols. A woman gets shot protecting you in a public restaurant, and you bring her into a safe house, and you think this is something we don't need to discuss? Zio, one word. But the way Alessio said it, quiet final with something under it that was not anger, but was related to anger, the way bedrock is related to the surface, stopped the older man mid-breath. This is not a council matter. Everything you do is a council matter. Not this, still quiet, still ice. She is not a liability. She is not a variable. She is not something to be managed or discussed or decided about by anyone in any room except me. His voice didn't rise. It compressed. Am I understood? The older man, his uncle Eleliana, was processing his uncle, representing something called the council. Looked at Alessio for a long moment. Then he looked at Eleliana again with the assessing look of a man who had spent 60 years measuring people and situations for viability. She hears too much, he said. She's standing right here, Eleliana said. Both men looked at her. Enzo against the wall did not move, but something shifted in his expression that might, under other circumstances, have been the beginning of a smile. I can hear everything being said, she continued, keeping her voice level. And I understand more of it than you probably want me to. And I want you to know that nothing I've heard in this house or anywhere else is something I would choose to repeat to anyone. Not because I'm afraid of consequences, because it's not mine to repeat. She looked at the uncle directly. I stepped in front of a bullet for your nephew because it was the right thing to do in that moment. That's the beginning and end of what I am to this situation. Whatever else you need to decide about me, you can decide it knowing that. The silence in the room had a specific quality. The uncle looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Alessio. Then he looked at Eleliana again, and something in his face shifted. Not warmth, not approval, but a kind of recognition that was its own thing. Her name is Vasquez, he said to Alessio. Yes, Alessio said. The mother's side or the father's mother's, Eleliana said. He looked at her once more. Then he turned to his nephew and said in Italian something she couldn't translate, but that carried a tone she understood regardless of language, the tone of a man revising a position he had arrived with. He said it once and didn't repeat it, and then he walked to the door, paused, and said in English without turning around. The Caselli situation is being finalized as of this morning, 48 hours. And he left. The door closed. The room was very quiet. Carmen appeared on the stairs behind Eleliana. She had been there the whole time. Eleliana realized, positioned where she could see and hear everything from above without being in the room. Exactly where she had put herself at the dinner table. A woman who had learned to read rooms. Council, Carmen said from the stairs. Not a question. Yes, Alessio said. Your family's governing body. Something like that. And they didn't know about Eleliana until now. No. And now they do. Carmen came down the last few stairs. Her face was doing the complex analytical work Eleliana knew so well. What does that mean practically? For her. Alessio was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Eleliana rather than Carmen when he answered, which told her the answer was for her and not for the room. It means the council knows who you are. It means they have assessed you and found you acceptable. He paused on the word like it was a faint irony he was acknowledging. It means you are now formally known to the structure that governs my family's affairs, which is either good or complicated, depending on how the next 48 hours resolve. Or both, Eleliana said. Or both, he agreed. Carmen looked at Eleliana. Eleliana looked back at her. This was one of their conversations that happened without language, the kind they had been having since childhood, the compressed shorthand of two people who knew each other well enough that full sentences were often redundant. Carmen's expression said, this is larger than I calculated. Eleliana's expression said, I know. Carmen's expression said, are you still all right? Eleliana's expression said, yes. Surprisingly, yes. Carmen exhaled slowly, looked at Alessio. Coffee, she said. Is there coffee in this house? There is very good coffee in this house, he said. Then let's have it. Carmen said, and you're going to tell me exactly what happens in the next 48 hours. All of it. The version you'd tell a lawyer who's already seen too much to be protected by not knowing. Alicio looked at Carmen Vasquez, who had walked into his house as furniture-arranging adversary and was now requesting a full briefing with the authority of someone who had decided that the best protection was information, and he said, "All right." And in the kitchen of a house that didn't appear in any record with his name on it, with the cold morning coming through the windows and Carmen demanding facts with a precision that would have made most men reconsider their life choices, Alicio Marchetti made coffee and told them both the truth. Not all of it. She understood there would never be all of it, but enough. The shape of it. The 3 years since Marco had died on a road that shouldn't have been dangerous. The slow, patient accumulation of evidence against Caselli, who had not only been acquiring territory, but had been the architect of an accident that was not an accident. The Thursday night at Rosario's that was supposed to be a quiet dinner, and had become something else because Vitali had made independent decisions, because 3 men had walked through a door, because a waitress with 7 years of muscle memory and a mother who had been unusual had stepped into an aisle. He was the one who arranged it, Ileliana said, not asking, confirming. Yes, Alessio said. We've known for 14 months. Building the kind of evidence that survives scrutiny has taken time. And now it's enough, he said simply. She looked at him across the kitchen, the man who had sat in a corner booth with the stillness of someone who had been carrying this for 3 years, who had eaten lamb and watched her work and said nothing, and then been walked into a Thursday night that had changed everything, and she thought about the 4-hour nights and the weight of a brother's name. It's almost over, she said. Something moved through his face. Yes, he said. Almost. Carmen was watching them both with her lawyer's eyes and her sister's eyes simultaneously. She said nothing. She drank her coffee. And outside in the direction of the city in the 48-hour corridor, between one version of things and the next, the situation that had started with a gunshot in a restaurant was moving toward its conclusion. Leliana felt it. The way she had always felt things in the body first before the mind caught up. A shift in pressure, a change in the air. Something was coming. And for the first time in 6 days, she was exactly where she needed to be when it arrived. The 48 hours did not feel like 48 hours. They felt like a held breath. The specific suspension of a moment that knows it is about to break. Leliana spent the first morning of it the way she spent most things that were out of her control, by focusing on what was in it. She called Dr. Ferrara, who had already been contacted by Alessio, and who offered her a modified approach to pain management that didn't blunt her edges. She did the exercises he had prescribed for her shoulder slowly and with focus, feeling each degree of movement as a small negotiation between her body and what had been done to it. She ate breakfast. She talked to Carmen, who had produced a laptop from somewhere and was working from the house's dining room table with the systematic intensity of a person who managed anxiety through productivity. The house had a rhythm. She learned it quickly the way she learned every room she spent time in. Sophia in the kitchen by 7. The 2 men outside rotating shifts every 4 hours. Enzo appearing and disappearing at intervals that corresponded to whatever information was moving between this house and wherever Alessio's attention was directed that morning. And Alessio himself present but occupied, moving between rooms and calls, with the contained focus of a man managing something that required his full capacity. He was not ignoring her. She understood the difference. Every time their paths crossed, he was present for exactly the moment of crossing a look, a word, a question about the shoulder, and then back to the thing that was resolving itself in real time somewhere beyond the walls of this house. She respected it. She respected it because she understood what it was to be in the middle of something that demanded everything you had. At noon on the first day, he found her in the hallway outside the room she'd been given and said without preamble, "Caselli knows your name." She went very still. "Since when?" she said. "This morning. One of his people accessed hospital records. Your name, your address, your employment." His voice was level, but his jaw was doing the thing it did when he was containing something larger than what was on the surface. "I had your apartment secured an hour ago. Nobody is going to your building." "Carmen," she said immediately. "Carmen's office has been contacted. She's not going anywhere until this is finished." She absorbed this. The specific feeling of having your ordinary life become a target, her apartment, her address, her name on a hospital intake form that she had filled out without thinking while bleeding on a restaurant floor. "How bad is this?" she asked. "It's manageable," he said. "Alessio." She said his name with the exact weight she intended. Don't manage me. How bad? He looked at her, 1 second too. The decision being made behind his eyes about how much the truth cost versus how much the softened version cost. He's rattled, he said finally. A rattled man makes faster decisions than a patient one. We're close enough to the end that him knowing your name accelerates things rather than changing them. A pause. But yes, it means today matters more than yesterday. What happens today? He was quiet for a moment. Things that I am not going to describe to you, not because you don't. He stopped. Not because I don't trust you with them, because I need you to be able to say honestly and completely that you don't know. She understood. She didn't like it, and she understood it. And me, Carmen, what do? You stay here. You stay inside. You let the people I trust do what they're doing. He looked at her directly. Can you do that? I'm not good at staying inside. I know. The corner of his mouth moved slightly, not quite the almost smile she had cataloged from the restaurant, something more tired and more real. I'm asking anyway. She looked at him, at the tiredness under the control, at the weight of 3 years visible in his face in this unguarded moment, at the man who had sat in a corner booth watching her carry other people's food and found her the most interesting person in the room. Yes, she said, I can do that. He nodded once, moved to leave. Alessio. He turned. When it's over, she said, the conversation we talked about. I'm still expecting it. Something moved through his face, something she was beginning to be able to read, the particular shift that meant she had said something that hit a place he kept offended. When it's over, he agreed. He left. She stood in the hallway and breathed. Then she went to the dining room and sat across from Carmen and said, He knows my name. Carmen's hands stilled on her keyboard. She looked up. Caselli. Since this morning. Carmen held her gaze for a long moment. Then she closed the laptop. Tell me everything he said. She did. Carmen listened in her complete way, not interrupting processing in real time. When Aleliana finished, Carmen was quiet for a moment. He's not wrong that acceleration can work in our favor, Carmen said slowly. A man making fast decisions makes messy decisions. Messy decisions leave evidence. She paused. But it also means we're in a window where anything could happen. Yes. And we're sitting in a house trusting a man we've known for 6 days. Yes, Carmen looked at her. Are you scared? Aleliana thought about it honestly. I'm alert, she said. There's a difference. Carmen almost smiled. Mom would definitely have said the same thing. They sat in the particular silence of two women who had grown up learning that the difference between fear and alertness was the difference between paralysis and survival. Then Carmen opened her laptop again, and Aleliana got up and went to find something useful to do with her hands. The afternoon passed in increments. At 2:15, Enzo came through the house quickly and spoke briefly to Sofia in the kitchen, too quiet for Aleliana to hear. At 3, one of the outside men was replaced by 2 others she hadn't seen before. At 4:30, Alessio took a call in the room at the end of the first-floor hallway, and she heard his voice through the closed door. Not words, just the rhythm of it. Fast, then silent, then 2 words she couldn't make out, then silence. At 5 o'clock, the door opened and he came out and looked at her across the hallway and said, It's done. She felt it move through her. Done. Caselli has been taken into federal custody. Evidence submitted to the U.S. Attorney's Office this afternoon, 14 months of it. Enough to hold him for a very long time. His voice was completely flat, the flatness of a man who has been carrying something so heavy for so long that the moment of setting it down is not immediately distinguishable from still carrying it. Marco's death has been reclassified as a homicide investigation. The detective assigned to it is someone I trust. She looked at him. At the flat voice and the still face and the 3 years of 4-hour nights ending in a sentence delivered in a hallway, in a house that didn't appear in any record with his name on it. She crossed the hallway and did something she hadn't planned. She put her good hand on the side of his face the way he had put his hand on the side of hers on a restaurant floor. Firmly, deliberately, staying. He went very still. I'm sorry about Marco, she said. I'm sorry it took 3 years. I'm sorry you had to carry it the way you carried it. He didn't speak. His jaw moved once under her hand, the only indication of something large being processed under significant control. Then he put his own hand over hers, not moving. It just covering it, holding it against his face, and they stood in the hallway in that position for a moment that had no category she had ever known before. Then he stepped back, and she let her hand fall, and they looked at each other in the changed air of an ended thing. "Carmen," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "I'll go tell her," he said. Carmen cried. This was the most surprising thing that happened that day. Carmen, who had not cried in the hospital room, who had not cried in the car, who had not cried when a man who arranged shootings learned her sister's name. Carmen heard the words federal custody and reclassified homicide investigation and put both hands over her face and cried for about 90 seconds with the intensity of someone releasing 6 days of perfectly managed fear all at once. Then she took her hands down, smoothed her jacket, said, "Okay, what do we do now?" "You can go home," Alicio said, "tonight. Enzo will drive you. Your apartment has been cleared." Carmen looked at Liliana. The look contained a question that was not about apartments or driving arrangements. "Give us a few minutes," Liliana said. Carmen nodded. She picked up her laptop. She walked to Alessio, stopped, and looked up at him with an expression that was not warmth and not hostility, but something more complicated, something that acknowledged a person without endorsing everything they were. "Thank you," she said, "for keeping her safe." "Thank you," he said, "for trusting me with her." Carmen held his gaze for one more beat. Then she went upstairs to pack. The house was quieter with just the two of them in the front room, the staff at the edges, the outside men doing what they did, the mechanisms of his world continuing to move in their orbits. "The conversation," she said. He looked at her. "Now." "We said when it was over." She sat down. "It's over." He sat across from her, and for the first time in 6 days, the urgency that had surrounded everything, the planning and the managing and the watching, was gone. What remained was just two people in a room and the specific clarity that comes when everything that was pressing has pressed its last. "What do you want to know?" he asked. "Everything," she said. "The real version. What your life actually looks like. What running a family like yours actually means. What last Thursday night was in the context of the 3 years before it. All of it. That's going to take more than one conversation." "I know," she said. "I'm not going anywhere tonight." He looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression broke open slightly. Not collapsed, not overwhelmed, but opened the way a window opens on a day when the weather finally changes. "My life," he said slowly, "is not a life that looks like yours. It doesn't have table 6 and 7-year regulars and the specific satisfaction of knowing the risotto is right. It has structures, obligations, history that predates me by 3 generations and will outlast me by 3 more probably." He paused. "I didn't choose it, I was born into it. And I've spent the past 2 years since my father stepped back trying to find the line between honoring it and changing it." "Can both be true at the same time?" she asked. "Honoring it and changing it. I think they have to be," he said. "Otherwise, the only options are surrender or destruction, and I've seen both of those, and they're not. They don't leave anything worth keeping." She looked at him. "What do you want? Not the family, not the obligation. You." He was quiet for a long time, longer than she expected. The kind of quiet that meant the question was not simple, or that the answer had not been spoken aloud before. "I want to sleep," he said finally. And then, like something that had been waiting in a locked room for 3 years, "I want to sit in a restaurant and eat a meal and not be calculating the room. I want to have a conversation that doesn't have anything under it." He paused. "I want to have earned something. Not inherited it, not taken it, earned it." He looked at her directly. "I don't know if I'm capable of the life you live, but I know that sitting in that corner booth on Thursday and watching you take care of every single person in that room like they all mattered equally, I know that was the first time in a long time I saw something I wanted to understand." "And now," she said, "do you understand it?" "No," he said, "but I want more time to try to." She breathed. Outside, the evening was doing whatever evenings did in this part of the world, cooling, darkening, moving from one version of itself to the next. Inside, the house held its breath. "I'm going back to Rosario's," she said, "in 6 weeks. When Ferrara clears me, I'm going to go back and take my section and refill table six's water and tell them the risotto is coming and it'll be worth the wait. That's my life and I'm going back to it. I know, he said. And your world, she said carefully, is your world. I'm not naive about what that means. The council, the structures, the things that get handled in ways I don't ask about. She held his gaze. I can't pretend that's not what it is. No, he said, you shouldn't. But, she said. He waited. But you sat in a corner booth for an hour and watched me like I was something worth watching, she said. And you bolted a handrail to my wall at 3 a.m. And you sat alone in a closed restaurant looking at the floor where I fell. She paused. Those things don't belong to the world you're describing. Those things are you, the actual you underneath the rest of it. He was very still. And I think, she said quietly, that person deserves the chance to sleep more than 4 hours, to earn something instead of inheriting it, to sit in a restaurant without calculating the room. She looked at him. I think that person is worth knowing. The silence was complete. Then Alessio Marchetti, who managed everything with control and managed everything with distance and had been managing everything alone for 3 years, said, I don't know how to do this. This, she repeated, whatever this is. His voice was rough. I know how to protect people. I know how to manage situations. I know how to maintain distance. That's been the operating principle for a long time. Distance is safety. He paused. You make distance feel like a waste. She looked at him across the room. At the hard angles in the dark eyes and the tiredness and the something underneath the tiredness that was alive and undefended and looking back at her. Alessio, she said. Yes. Come have dinner with me when I'm back at Rosario's. Come in on a Thursday, not a corner booth, a regular table in the middle of the room, and let me bring you the lamb and tell you the risotto is coming and introduce you to the couple at table 6. She paused. Come be a person in a restaurant. Just that. Just once. He looked at her for so long she thought she had miscalculated. Then Paulo's had been making the lamb the same way for 11 years. It's never wrong, she said. Something happened in his face. Not the almost smile she had cataloged. Not the brief, real smile she had caught once at the table. Something she hadn't seen from him before, something uncalculated and unmanaged and entirely present. All right, he said. Carmen appeared in the doorway with her bag, read the room in one practiced second and said, I'll wait in the car. She disappeared. Leliana stood. So did he. They stood across from each other in the front room of a house that had held the last week of both their lives, and the thing between them was not resolved and not simple and not safe, and also she was completely clear about this not going anywhere. The stairs, she said, at my building. I'm going to miss that handrail. It stays, he said. I had them install it properly. She laughed, the same way she had laughed that morning, and surprised and genuine the laugh of someone who keeps encountering a person who doesn't fit any category she has. Good night, Alessio, she said. Good night, Leliana. He said her name the way he'd been saying it since the phone call, like something he had been practicing and had gotten exactly right. The car will take you both home. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She stopped. One more thing, she said without turning around. Yes. I'm going to ask you something and I need a real answer. All right. She turned. Are you going to be okay when this is all settled and the structures go back to their structures and the 48 hours are behind you and it's just you and the 4-hour nights and Marco's case moving through whatever it moves through? She looked at him directly. Are you going to be okay? He was quiet, not the pause of someone choosing words, the pause of someone who had not been asked that question in a very long time and needed a moment to locate the honest answer. I don't know yet, he said. But I think he stopped, found it. I think I'm going to try to be. That's different from what I could have said a week ago. She nodded. That was enough. That was in fact everything. She opened the door and walked out into the night where Carmen was waiting and Enzo was waiting and the car that would take them back to their city and their apartment and their ordinary, extraordinary lives was waiting. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could feel him watching her from the doorway. That same quality of attention she had felt from the moment she had walked across a restaurant toward a corner booth and not known what she was walking toward. She had felt it through the whole week. She would feel it, she understood now, for a long time after this. The car pulled down the long drive, and the house fell away behind them. Carmen sat beside her in the dark of the back seat and didn't say anything for the first 5 minutes, which meant she was doing the version of processing that happened after the analytical version was finished. The human version, the version that felt things instead of calculating them. Then she reached over and took Leliana's good hand and held it. "You're going to see him again," Carmen said. "Not a question." "Yeah," Leliana said. "And you're going to let whatever this is become whatever it becomes." "Yeah," Carmen was quiet for a moment. "She would have liked him," she said again softly. Their mother, who had been unusual, who had always had a weakness for people who meant what they said. She would have given him an extremely hard time, and then she would have liked him. "I know," Leliana said. They held hands in the dark car moving south toward the city, toward their lives, toward the life that had been ordinary until a Thursday and would never be ordinary in exactly the same way again. The city lights came up on the horizon, familiar and relentless, and entirely itself, and Leliana looked at them with the eyes of a woman who had stepped into an aisle without thinking, and discovered on the other side of it that the step had been the truest thing she had ever done. She had not planned any of it. She had not chosen any of it. She had simply moved when moving was what was needed, the way she had always moved, the way her mother had always moved, the way the women in her family moved through a world that was sometimes dangerous and always worth showing up for completely. A bullet had not taken that from her. It had, in the strange arithmetic of real things, added to it. 6 weeks later, on a Thursday night, a man walked into Rosario's fine dining in Midtown Manhattan and asked for a table in the middle of the room. Not the corner booth. A regular table in the middle of everything where the noise of the room surrounded him on all sides, and the espresso machine hissed, and the jazz standard played, and people laughed at tables around him without lowering their voices. He sat with his hands on the table and waited. Leliana Vasquez came across the room with a water glass in each hand, her shoulder healed and her section full, and table 6 occupied by the couple who always ordered the risotto. She walked toward him the way she walked toward every table, with the full weight of her attention, like every single person was someone worth doing it well for. She set down his water, looked at him. "Good evening," she said. "My name is Leliana. I'll be taking care of you tonight." Alessio Marchetti looked up at her, no corner, no calculation, no room to measure, and managed just a man at a table in the middle of everything, exactly where she had asked him to be, and smiled. A real smile. Unhurried and unguarded and entirely present. "The lamb," he said, "if it's still good." "Paulo's been making it the same way for 11 years, she said. "It's never wrong," he said. She smiled back. And the room continued to be what rooms are, full of ordinary people living their ordinary lives, loud and warm, and completely unaware that the woman refilling their water glasses had once stepped in front of a bullet for a stranger, and that the stranger was sitting at table 7, and that the distance between who they had been that Thursday night and who they were right now was exactly the distance of a choice made without hesitation in the half-second when it mattered most. She went to put in his order. And for the first time in 3 years, Alessio Marchetti sat in a restaurant without calculating the room, because he wasn't watching the room. He was watching her. And that finally was exactly enough.